What's up, everyone? Welcome to another UFC Quick Picks here on the Mayo Media Network. We have UFC Vegas 91 on Saturday. Nicolau versus Alex Perez in the main event. 13 fights on the slate. Little bit of a hangover card, I've been calling it, from UFC 300. Not the greatest names or the greatest talents in the world, but should still be a fun and entertaining fight card. And we have a lot of fight cards still to come over the next couple months. As usual, I'm going to give you my favorite cash game play, tournament play, salary play, and a matchup I like on this slate. Before I do, please make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment below. Why don't you give me your favorite underdog on the slate? I always like doing that. Someone below the mid-range. I think there's a lot to choose from. If you can correctly identify which underdog is going to win inside the distance, potentially, you're definitely getting a leg up on the field. So always curious to what y'all have to say. All right, without further ado, let's get into my cash game play of the week. It is going to be Mr. James Yontop at 8.2K. DraftKings kind of screwed this one up, quite frankly. Yontop was supposed to fight Gabe Green. That fight was canceled last week, but they decided to price the fight in anyway. I don't think the stat provider ruled the matchup out quickly enough, and so Yontop was priced as a pick'em against Gabe Green, but Green pulled out. They called up Chris Padilla on short notice, and now Yontop is a massive favorite at minus 384. Let me refresh the odds. I've seen him up to like minus 475 in some spots, pushing minus 400 on most books. Minus 384 at 8.2K. Inside distance odds are not out yet, but the fight's under 2.5, minus 170. So Yontop's going to have a good individual inside distance line as well. And I think he's just an obvious target for the value in cash games. He provides a lot of salary relief. He's one of the most likely fighters to win on the entire slate based on his odds. And he'll have, decent finishing metrics as well, making his UFC debut out of the Peruvian regional scene. I'm not even like that high on Yontop. He seems like a decent pace fighter. He can throw a lot of volume, decent striking, but unsure if he's skilled enough to really compete against anyone but the lower echelon of the division. Have some concerns about grappling. Kind of regardless, though, I think you got to look to him in cash games at 8.2K for that value. Potentially move away from him in some spots in tournaments. There's a lot of interesting pivot options priced above Yontop, and there's some strong high upside underdogs priced below him. So I don't think you have to force Yontop in for tournaments, but in cash games, you're taking that value at 8.2K. Next up, my tournament play of the week. Let's go pretty contrarian here. I want to talk about Ketlin Souza at 9.2K. It's a really strong range, and I think the majority of ownership will go to Medic, Denise, Ryan Spann, etc. I think Ketlin Souza is going to be very low owned, and potentially rightfully so, because I don't think her chances of dominating or winning by round one knockout are as high as other fighters in this range. So targeting the big guys, the finishers like the ones I named, makes a lot of sense. If you're looking for a place to be unique, though, I do think Souza's interesting because she's fighting Marnik Mann, who just isn't UFC caliber. And I'm not saying Mann can't win this fight. Mann has some wrestling, and she'll at least attempt takedowns, which is good enough to win in the women's division. But Mann is not a great grappler by any stretch. She has no striking at all. She's not physical. She can't defend takedowns. And she's mostly just gotten dominated against any decent opponent. She was head kick KO'd on the Contender Series. She was totally dominated in her UFC debut as well. And she just profiles as the type of fighter who's going to get dominated in losses and potentially lose inside the distance. Souza's only plus 200 to win inside the distance. It's not an incredible metric compared to other fighters on this range, but that's what's going to make her contrarian. Still, I'm going to be spreading out my exposure, but again, what I really like about Souza, just as a base striker, she's got some wrestling and grappling in her game. Not a fighter who I'm in love with talent-wise, but it's the opponent here. When Mann loses, I think there's domination potential. I am not sold that Souza will pull it off this week, but that's why she's going to be contrarian option at 9.2K. Mann has looked awful a couple times in defeats, and I think we're going to see some pretty poor defeats again before she inevitably gets cut from the roster. Maybe you don't jam Souza in this week, but I think she's a very strong contrarian pivot in the top range for matchup purposes. All right, next up, my salary play of the week. Let's go with Bogdan Guskov at 7.3K. He's in one of the strong fights to target this week against Ryan Spann. He's plus 165 to win, plus 175 to win inside the distance, though, and only 7.3K. He's coming off a first-round knockout win against Zach Palga, in which he scored 107 DraftKings points. Guskov has issues. He's got poor wrestling. He doesn't... there's not a lot of win equity outside of the first round. I don't think he's some elite striker at all, but he murdered a lot of his regional competition early. He's already looked dangerous early in the UFC, and I think the majority of his win equity will come by early knockouts. Ryan Spann might take him down, might submit him, but Ryan Spann's only landed one takedown in his last 6 fights combined. Ryan Spann gets hit a lot more than he lands strikes. Ryan Spann's defending strikes like 46%, 45%, excuse me. And so if this fight plays out in the feed, I definitely think Guskov's live, and I think Guskov's live to win by knockout. He'll probably be a popular target at 7.3K, but it's an easy paydown option where there's still a lot of finishing equity built into that construction. Of course, there are other fighters I like below the mid-range as well, but I think Guskov has a very legitimate chance to win. I expect if he wins it all, it will come early. It will come by knockout, and I'm certainly open to playing him this week for salary savings at 7.3K. And finally, my matchup of the week, I'm rolling with Jonathan Pierce versus David Onama in the People's main event here. Should be a really fun fight. Pierce has shown a lot of grappling domination in his wins, and that style of fighting scores very, very well on DraftKings. We've seen him put up 134, 123, 145, 104, and it just feels very likely that when Pierce wins, based on his aggressive grappling style, he'll score quite well. And he's fighting David Onama, who is dangerous, is physical, is powerful, but has slowed down in fights, has been out-grappled at times. And so if Pierce wins, it does feel like it could come from a high-ish volume of takedowns, control, ground strikes, and a potential finish. He's plus 160, I believe, to win inside the distance. Let me double check that. Minus 163 to win is Pierce, plus 150 to win inside the distance. 8.6K, it's not an expensive price to pay. And if he wins, I feel pretty confident in Pierce exceeding value at that number. I don't think it's an easy matchup for him, but I like the ceiling for Pierce in a win. Onama, as the underdog, is going to have to defend takedowns, keep the fight upright, and if so, I think he has legitimate knockout upside. Plus 195 to win inside the distance, coming off a big knockout, plus 113 points on DraftKings. He's more boom or bust in the sense that he'll likely need a knockout to exceed value, contend for the optimal lineup at 7.6K, but I think that outcome is very live in this particular matchup. I sort of view it as a binary matchup where whichever side wins is going to win somewhat dominantly. Should mean a pretty big score from the winner, and I don't mind prioritizing Onama as one of the better underdogs at 7.6K. All right, guys, that's going to do it for the UFC Vegas 91 Quick Picks. Thank you so much for the support. You can follow me on Twitter, Appley, TTP. EstablishTheRun.com for any extra MMA content you would like. Just posted a 2-hour podcast with my good buddy Luke Lamb, Sparring with Reality. We got full breakdowns of every fight on the slate, projections, rankings, all that good stuff. So make sure you check that out, EstablishTheRun.com. Brett Appley, TTP for more information. Thanks to Pat and the team for having us on. As always, good luck this week, and we'll talk to you all soon. Peace.